Hello Kindred Longevity Lifestyle Designers, this is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. You probably know, if you've followed my channel for long enough, that one of the biggest motivating and inspirational figures and even factors in my decision to begin the in-depth look at health when it comes to herbalism and more sort of Chinese perspectives on health was when I came across the story of Li Ching-Yuen. He was a figure that is obviously surrounded with a lot of mystery still, and it will never be fully clarified just because of the lack of record keeping from his time period. Also just because he was a figure who kept himself very separate from conventional society. But even though the Chinese were very good with record keeping, compared to today's record keeping and what the Guinness Book of World Records considers their standard of good record keeping, he doesn't qualify for the world's longest lived person ever because of the lack of a clear birth certificate and all these things. In China, they didn't actually have birth certificates until after the Cultural Revolution. So people that were born at that point are still not eligible to be the longest lived people alive. So for all we know, there are people in China right now who have broken the record for Jean-Louis Calment, who is the world record holder for longest lived person to be lived to 122 years of age. Now Li Ching-Yuen is rumored to have lived to 256 years, so that's quite a lot further. That's more than double Jean-Louis Calment's age, which just on that fact alone, most people just dismiss it offhand. They don't even pay attention to the story or glean anything from the information around it just on that basis alone, which I think is a bit foolish. No one has to believe in that as fact. It's just speculations. Like, that might be a possibility with the absolute most pristine lifestyle and herbs and being out in the wilderness. Probably is not possible today with the amount of pollution in our environment and air and what have you. So long before industry had hit China and made it probably one of the most polluted countries in the world. So if you had ever heard of him and read his Wikipedia entry, which is decent enough, it gives some explanation behind it, and he gave a date that he claims to have been born in, which was 1736, but the disputed record is 1677, which would make him 256 because he died in May 6, 1933. And that was actually reported in an article in Time magazine claimed he had lived that long. So his claim of birth was 1736, which would have made him 197. And that could seem a little more reasonable, even though that's a good 75 years past Jean-Louis Calment's age. So one possibility here, which a lot of people have suggested, is that, and actually this was common at the time, so this could be the explanation of things, is if he had a father or even grandfather who had his name and he just took it, because there were records at varying points that were found in the research by some of these people that you can read about in the Wikipedia article. I'll just link to it below just to get the basics on the story, even though there's some sketchy bits around that, and I'm going to disagree with some of the points. If, say, he had a father who had a lot of kids through life and then had one of his later kids in his 50s, which happened to be Li Ching-Yuen, you could see that, take 50 years off of 197, and you're going to have an age in the 140s, and, that seems reasonable. I mean, if people had such strong genetic integrity that hadn't been worn down for whatever reasons. If you know Jean-Louis Calment's lifestyle, and she wasn't that active, she wasn't doing anything that extraordinary for her health. She was possibly doing things that might have detracted from it, but maybe it was helping her health with the smoking, but she was also eating tons of chocolate, and probably a lot of sugar, and she somehow managed to get to 122. That's quite remarkable. So with someone who, within the Chinese culture, had such good practices and lifestyle, could they have made it further? So whether it's 140 something, 197, or 256, we can learn that this guy was a real guy. He died in 1933. He had a lot of offspring, and what's not talked about in the article is his genealogy started the Li School of Family Arts. There's several schools of Qigong and martial arts that claim to be connected to him, but they're all claiming some sort of learned Qigong practice or other thing, which could very well be true. They might have learned something, some student way down in the lineage learned something and adopted it and taught it. What remains, though, is his family line of martial arts, all with the Li family. So in Chinese culture, the last name is actually put first, and you'll see it often written with the last name with a comma and then a name or two names. So Ching-Yuen is his name, Li is the family name. And the Li family arts include internal martial arts, Baguzhong, Xinyi, and Tai Chi Chuan. There's also something called blue heron boxing and snake boxing, which is the ground tactics they use. And the family lineage had to know all these healing methods and good health methods because they were bodyguards, and that was their profession that was passed down in their family. They had to know things like bone setting. They used herbs for more acute issues, and they also had various types of qigong, which they did for upkeep of health as well. Internal martial arts are known to be good for your health. The Bagua, Xinyi, and Tai Chi, but these were more ancient, real-world practices. It's not like the stuff you see today being done in seniors' homes. It's very much real-world, applicable martial arts, much in the same way that you'd have certain martial arts taught to the military. Then you have the traditional martial arts that are just for show, like wushu. There's a ton of them that are like that from all sorts of cultures. But then there's the real martial arts. And I'm not even talking about the stuff used in mixed martial arts. I'm talking about the stuff that's designed to kill people as soon as possible if you're getting into a conflict with them. You know, breaking limbs, breaking joints, really firm joint locks that are illegal in MMA. So what I've always told people who are interested in martial arts is don't waste your time with some art that is flashy and looks good in front of judges. You could do MMA if you really like that and you're drawn to the competition aspect. It's a bit garish and not really applicable in the real world. If you really want the best arts for self-defense, you have to do the arts that are done by the military. Sometimes police and security guards are taught them. Stuff that has real-world testing done to it. The Li family arts were done in that way. Generations of real-world applications being done to hone it into an effective combat skill. Much in the same way that Sistema was developed in Russia for the special forces there. Krav Maga is used by Israeli special forces, and you see a lot of that in action movies now because it looks unique and people recognize that that is more effective than Muay Thai mixed with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm not knocking those martial arts. It's of course better to have something if you're going to be getting into a dangerous situation. But if you were to put the same amount of time into training a real-world applicable martial art versus something else, you're probably better off with the real-world application. Now let's get back to the Li family. They had all these arts. They were in good health. Second link below is to the Nine Dragon Baguzhong site. This is an art being taught all over the world, largely in the US and a little bit in Canada. I trained a little bit for 2 years in the Toronto school. It's always been something I've had in the back of my mind that I want to take up again. It's a matter of time and cost. I'd have to travel out there quite a bit. But it's well worth it if you're drawn to it. And I was able to do a few workshops with Dr. John Painter. He's the first non-Li family member to have had the system passed down to him. And he was told by the last Li family member that had learned it to spread it and actually teach it. Whereas before it was always just within their family. But during the Cultural Revolution, Li Longdao, who by the way lived to be 100, he moved to the US, to Texas, and his kids didn't want to learn it. So it got passed down to a non-family member because he didn't want to see his art die out. And actually that second link below, I'll link to a specific page on the site. You can look anywhere on the site for all the information, but I just wanted to show the lineage of the Li family members. And you can actually look at their births and deaths, and a lot of them are up there in length. There's Li Renma, who lived to be 112. Li Longdao lived to be 100. There's one or two others that lived to be 100 or more. There's a bunch of them in the 90s. So most of them were in good health, and it just goes to show that even in the past, in China, when perhaps the average lifespan was in the 30s, 40s, 50s, depending on where you lived and your status in society, people who were active and had a good family health practices were living a long time. So if you read about Li Ching-Yuen online, you'll have probably heard things like he was 7 feet tall. There was another picture floating around of this very tall guy in front of two other people. And if you look at that picture and compare it to the other pictures of Li Ching-Yuen, it does not seem to be the same person. Very different, even face shape, and as someone ages, yes, they look older and the face changes, but you don't get a very elongated head turning into a round face. So I think there's something wrong with the matching up those pictures. I don't believe the one with the tall guy in it is actually him. And actually from Dr. John Painter in one of his workshops, he mentioned that Li Ching-Yuen was 6 feet tall, not 7 feet tall. So through the passing down of stories and legends, things can get exaggerated and made to be a bit grandiose, including people's stature. So we really don't know his true height, but from the lineage holder of the family martial art, that's what I heard in one of the workshops. So it was reading about what Li Ching-Yuen was doing that, like I said, really pushed me onto a path of learning about herbs and martial arts. I was doing martial arts a little bit before, but internal martial arts, and then wanting to get more into health and diet. And we know that he was consuming certain herbs. The 5 that were mentioned in the Wikipedia article were Lingzi, or reishi mushroom, ginseng, hushawu, gotu kola, and goji berries. I believe the story goes that he was eating goji berries after being instructed around the age of 70. And again, in the article it talks about he was instructed about this at the age of 120. I've read other sources that said 70, so I'm kind of thinking 70 makes more sense because he didn't really start a lot of practices until he was later in life. So that in and of itself might lend itself to the idea of he might have taken an ancestor's name to sound like he had an extended life. And if he didn't start more practices regularly until he was 70, could just mean that his grandfather was, or father was 70 when he began to take on the name and start doing things in a different way. I'm just speculating here. But yeah, he was instructed to do a specific type of qigong along with consuming goji berries every day. And he followed that diligently. Then he learned about these other herbs and he was taking them. I've taken them all. I think reishi was the first one I took after reading about this, and I was quite impressed with the effects of it. He was specifically taking hushawu and ginseng in a rice wine tincture, and he drank a little bit of that every day. There was also some licorice in there, Chinese licorice specifically. It's a bit different from Western licorice, more of a tonic herb. You can take it daily over a long period of time. So in editing the video today, hence why I'm dressed differently, I noticed that I hadn't talked about diet. I've read a few things about what Li Ching-Yuen ate. It wasn't mentioned in the Wikipedia article, but just through various sources, I've heard a whole range of things which, yeah, they just don't seem factual, except perhaps maybe how he died and what he was eating right at the end of his life. I heard that from one source that he was only eating meat twice a year. He'd eat some wild rabbit twice a year. He potentially never eat grains. He was not eating any plant matter that came from below ground, so no roots, but that contradicts the fact that he was taking ginseng and hushawu, which are root herbs. So perhaps, aside from the hushawu and ginseng, he was avoiding root vegetables. But if he was doing all those things, and I just heard these scattered throughout various articles I've read over time, not eating meat except twice a year, not eating grain, not eating root vegetables, there's not really any source of starch unless he's eating squash in the wild somehow in abundance in China. It just doesn't seem plausible. He's not a fruitarian, he's not a raw foodist as far as I know, but he's constantly sipping on this ginseng hushawu wine. It's all very far-fetched, so there's not any clear indication of what he was eating, except perhaps if he was living in the wild, he would have been eating a wild food diet, which may have contained a whole wide range of things. You'd really have to know the plant matter and what was available on Emei Mountain, E-M-E-I Mountain. If you want to look that up and look into that, I just simply don't know how he would have done it with eating such little meat. You could speculate that he's some sort of a herbal breatharian, meaning he's not full breatharian, but he's gotten to a point where he's not consuming much solid food. I think that's kind of far-fetched, as most people would realize why that would be far-fetched. But he could have also been doing sort of a low-calorie thing, hence why he might have lived so long. There's anti-aging effects with not overeating. And it's said that at that point where he died in 1933, I believe he had students or people around him. He had been invited to some sort of banquet in a larger city. Then I've also read different things saying he just went off and died after that banquet, possibly from eating food he wasn't used to or overeating. In other things I've read, he told the students he knew he was going to go die and it was just his time, and he basically predicted his own death and just departed like that. So don't really know exactly what happened because there's conflicting reports. And just like most of the facts around this whole figure, there's nothing that can be verified absolutely except for things like the picture, the fact that he was alive and died at a certain time, the fact that he did certain things and people learned from him and they were his students, and that he definitely was someone who lived to a great age, whether it was 256, 197, 140 something, or even maybe less. We know from his family lineage that there was a lot of centenarians within the family, that they cultivated these really profound practices for their health and for self-defense. And also, I think a major key here is the herbs he was collecting, selling, and taking. So if you want to use any of the herbs he's talked about using, you can check the links below, the 2 links I've already linked to, and there's links to the 5 herbs, reishi mushroom, goji berry, hushubu, gotu kola, and ginseng, if you want to try some of the sources I recommend for those herbs. Then the Wikipedia article also speculates on practices he was doing, the exercises, the Qigong. Talked about the 12 silks, which I think is similar, perhaps, if not identical, with some extra practices added on to the 8 silk brocades. I guess 12, that number is just correlating to the 12 meridians of the body. So apparently he was doing a practice like this. He was doing the Bagua which, if you're living out in the woods on your own, it's a good thing to know a bit of self-defense. So there's actually one other practice which I'm pretty sure he was doing, which is in the Li family arts, and I can't say much about it because you have to practice within the system to learn it, and you can always take workshops where it's being advertised as part of what's being taught, which every few years it gets taught in varying places. So it is basically a form of circle walking, much like Bagua Zhang is, but it incorporates slower movements. It's obviously not martial, it's not for self-defense. It's very similar to, from my experience, to microcosmic orbit. There's certain patterns in it which work some of those channels, except you're up and moving. It's not a sitting down meditation, and that's part of the amazing health benefits of it, is you are moving. The circular motion, the circular walking, is really good in that it constantly keeps your pineal gland guessing that direction, because if you know turning in circles, your body has to constantly recalibrate and adjust to it. And much in the way that Canada geese and a lot of animals have this ability to sense their direction, north, south, east, west, we have that internal compass ability as well. It's very subtle, and it's due probably to the fact that there's magnetic particles in varying parts of our body, but also in our pineal gland, which helps us with direction. And by constantly turning doing circle walking and doing these fluid circular movements, you're keeping that in check, so to speak. It's a lot more complicated than that. There's a scientific edge to it that Dr. Painter sort of deciphered, which again you have to learn from him or learn from his books. And yeah, you can learn more about that on the site if you want to read about flying dragon qigong. So the other thing that really influenced me from hearing the story or legend about Li Ching-Yuen, actually two things. The other aspect being the fact that he went and lived in the woods on a mountain. This kind of planted that seed in my mind of rewilding. I didn't realize it at the time, but holding that idea to a lofty degree, which I have over the years, had me more interested when I started to hear about things like rewilding and living off the food you could find in the wild as being perhaps the most optimal for our health. And that's really kind of what he was doing. He was doing his own thing off in the woods. And it might not be something I'm striving for, to live exactly in the same way, but it's inspirational in that sense to do some of these things. And then his other thing that really inspired me was the 4 lines that he lived by. And you've probably heard me talk about them before too. It's sit like a tortoise, walk sprightly like a pigeon, sleep like a dog, and keep a tranquil mind or heart. So it's actually translated as heart, but in Chinese medicine or Chinese understanding, the heart is the mind, it's the seat of the mind. So what we can think of that as is sit like a tortoise is basically meditate every day, keep that practice in place, which helps with all the others. Walk sprightly like a pigeon is to walk with vigor, walk regularly. You could even do Bagwadzong, which is a practice that has circular walking built into it. So by exercising, you're doing low-grade cardio. You can do parts of it that are more sped up. If you want to work it that's more vigorous sometimes, then sleep soundly like a dog obviously makes sense. To get enough sleep and sleep deeply and do things that help you sleep deeply. And then keep a quiet heart is to not get caught up into the day-to-day ridiculousness that most people exhibit and choose to get involved in, whether it's drama on TV and media, whether it's drama in the lives of people around you. It's not saying you can't interact with people, it's saying let your practice spill over into your life so that you can exist around these people that are chaotic and are going to cause themselves health problems from their anxiety and their worries and their chaos. And you can be an anchor, perhaps for them, but for yourself. And that's going to be really excellent for your health. You know, when you don't have this stress in your life, or when the stresses that could affect you don't affect you, you're going to live happier and be healthier, especially as you get older and on with your age. So let me know what you think about the legend of Li Ching-Yuen. Have you ever done any of these things that he does, that he advocates? Has it inspired you? When did you first hear about it? If you've known about it for a while. And also like, favorite, and share the video if you feel so inclined. So with that, I'll talk to you next time. Take care and embrace life without limits.